Hello, I'm Essie Fox, and welcome back to Talking the Gothic, where today I'll be discussing the genre of folklore horror. The inspiration for folklore is complex, but to give a broad description, stories in this style are mostly placed in rural settings, settings that at first might appear to be idyllic before they descend into more hellish nightmare realms, because although the natural world can be benign and beautiful, it can also be cruel, or to quote from Lord Tennyson's poem In Memoriam, it can be red in tooth and claw. As in the classic Gothic trope, characters in folklore horror must often face oppressive forces and in a state of isolation, without the protection or assistance that exists within social communities formed in villages or towns, and away from the rules on which such societies are structured. A protagonist may find themselves completely alone and imprisoned, not so much by the walls of haunted ruins and buildings, but by nature itself, by the encroachment of dark woods, by battlements formed of hills or caves as dark as any dungeon, by animals wild or tame, which promote a sense of fear when they no longer behave in the ways one would expect. Basically, the folklore world is one in which natural forces become inhospitable to man, even threatening life itself. The oppression of weather is another dominating feature, with the extremes of the turning seasons. And in such a world, a landscape may be a paradise in summer months, but like the ancient Greek myth told of Persephone, the joy in spring and summer months when the goddess is reunited with her lost daughter, Demeter, is snatched away with every winter, when there is sorrow and grief because Demeter must return to Hades in the underworld, back to the realm of the dead. Death awaits us all, and this inevitability is represented by the falling of leaves in autumn months, by the rot of vegetation when everything grows so much colder and nothing grows, and when the winter brings darkness too, a darkness that's both real and allegorical. This is a time when evil can rise up to wreak a trail of desolation, whether that ruin affects the physical landscape around us or unhinges the minds of those who become immersed in these events. This psychological dread can be coloured by fear induced by local superstitions, myths from old religions, pagan beliefs with rituals involving blood or sacrifice, whether of animals or of men. Like Demeter, who's lost to the darkness of hell, these sacrifices may be needed to restore the world of summer. But in this genre, generally speaking, joy is a rare thing to find because folklore horror is bleak. As an example of this, I think about The Wicker Man, a film from 1973 and inspired by a novel written by David Pinner, which was called The Ritual. The film is centred on Neil Howie, a policeman who's sent to a remote Scottish island to investigate the mystery of a missing girl called Rowan. A devout Christian himself, Howie is somewhat at a loss when he finds the churches on the island are in a state of neglect and the inhabitants are involved in pagan worship instead. As the story carries on, he witnesses scenes of public sexuality with rituals such as dancing around a phallic maypole or old cures for medicines being used instead of new, such as toads being placed in a mouth to cure sore throats. The inn in which he's staying, which is called the Green Man, is full of photographs that show celebrations of the harvest, and each one of them features a girl chosen to be that year's May Queen. But one photograph is missing, and that's the one that should have shown Rowan, the girl who's disappeared. Told that Rowan is dead and has been buried on the island after the harvest failed to grow during the year of her crowning, Howie arranges for her body to be exhumed from its grave, but instead of a girl, he finds the body of a hare. Still believing Rowan is alive, perhaps at danger of some brutal pagan sacrifice to come, Howie tries but fails to return to the mainland, where he'd been hoping to alert other policemen to help him in the search. Left alone, he infiltrates the coming May Day celebrations, stealing the innkeeper's costume of a fool, and thus disguised, he finds Rowan is still alive and flees with the girl to the safety of a cave. However, when they re-emerge, Rowan happily leaves him to return to the other Islanders, while Howie is told by the Lord of the Isle that he, and not the girl, is going to be the sacrifice to ensure the next year's harvest. For Howie fits every need, being a virgin and a fool, and representing the power of the king, i.e., the law, all being elements that the Lord says their ritual demands. The story ends tragically with Howie being imprisoned in the cage of a gigantic wicker man, which is then set ablaze as the islanders look on and sing the Old English folk song, Summer is a Coming In. Meanwhile, as he burns, Howie recites Psalm 23 from the Bible he believes in. But will he be saved by the faith he holds most dear, or be consumed in the hell and the fire of this more ancient religion? This film is truly horrific, and it draws on many themes still recurring today in folklore Gothic novels. For instance, the idea of the Green Man, which is the name of the inn in the film, is based on the creed of a world forever dying but being reborn with every summer, a form at once both humanoid but also made of vegetation, as if to represent the roots of the plants and the flowers that have grown down into the soil where the bodies of dead are buried, mingling there with flesh and bones before they sprout anew in a continual cycle of recreation. The Wicker Man also draws on the folklore horror image of a symbolic animal. In this case, the hare that's found in the grave that was supposed to hold the body of a girl. This theme is further developed by Andrew Michael Hurley in his own novel, Starve Acre. And this is a novel that's also been made into a film in which Richard, an archaeologist professor, his wife, and Owen, his young son, who is an asthmatic, go to live in an I'll get this right in a minute, go to live in an isolated moorland farmhouse that had previously belonged to Richard's now dead father. Soon after they arrive, Owen starts to talk about strange whistling sounds, and he mentions a name, someone called Jack Gray. Other disturbing things start to occur, and one day Owen is found with a sharp stick in his hands, and a pony has been viciously blinded. A little later, he collapses and dies in the throes of an asthma attack, after which, beset by grief, Richard becomes obsessed with a book in the house, in which his father has written of a place on the farm where the spirit of nature, residing underground, can be drawn up to rise into the living world above it. And even more disturbingly, Richard reads of how his father once tried but failed to sacrifice the life of his own son to the spirit of that place, to offer Richard's own soul to the darkness below. Now, as a man, Richard finds and starts to dig in the place that his father's book so vividly described. There he discovers some bones, the bones, again, of a hare. He takes these back to the house where they miraculously begin to regenerate, growing muscle, sinew, hair, even veins pulsing with blood. And this newly living hare is called Jack Gray, and Jack Gray represents the natural spirit of the world. And what's even more disturbing is the fact that Richard's wife begins to look on the horror of this beast as if it is her own child born anew, even creating a nursery for the hare in Owen's old bedroom. This is another extremely sinister story in which the innate instinct to love as a parent is overwhelmed by other forces we simply can't understand, by ancient powers and beliefs that have been driven underground by the Christian faith. But in the realms of folklore horror, the hidden darkness is still visible for those with eyes to see, for those who are tempted to literally dig below the surface of man's civilized world and thus expose old mysteries And once they are relieved, these primeval beliefs may lead to madness and despair, perhaps destruction, or they can summon untamed spirits from other worlds, from other times. This idea has also been explored in other earlier Gothic horrors, such as The Great God Pan, written in 1894 by Arthur Machen. And there's also Algernon Blackwood's 1907 novella, which is titled The Willows. The Willows is a story of two friends who go canoeing on the River Danube, where, surrounded by nature and all the vagaries of weather, they drift between the tunnels of the trees that line the banks. And the sounds those willows make, the shadows they cast, they begin to feel like something ominous and stir a sense of unease. The two friends then experience strange tappings on the ground around their tent during the night. The air grows heavy, the wind is howling, the trees appear to move in ways that don't seem natural, as if encroaching on the men. They also witness dark shapes emerging from the upper branches, and here I'll quote from the book. They first became properly visible, these huge figures, just within the tops of the bushes, immense, bronze-coloured, moving, and wholly independent of the swaying of the branches. I saw them plainly and noted, now I came to examine them more calmly, that they were very much larger than human, and indeed, something in their appearance proclaimed them not human at all. Certainly, they were not merely the moving tracery of the branches against the moonlight. They shifted independently. They rose upwards in a continuous stream from earth to sky, interlaced one with another, making a great column, and I saw their limbs and huge bodies melting in and out of each other, forming this serpentine line that bent and swayed and twisted spirally with the contortions of the wind-tossed trees. Well, the men in this story awake to find their boat has been damaged in the night. Supplies of food have disappeared. Mistrust and violence ensue until one of the friends tries to kill himself by drowning, claiming the river and the trees demand a sacrifice. He's dissuaded from this madness, but when they carry on, they discover the corpse of a stranger lodged among the roots of the willows, and from that body, the very same dark forms that they'd seen earlier now appear to be born, rising up into the sky, leaving the body through hideous, funneled, gaping sores. Have the men really witnessed something supernatural, or is this nothing more than a bloated, rotting body from which maggots are now hatching and buzzing into the air merely as flies? The ambiguity, the not knowing what is true in the story, is so often a feature of this type of Gothic horror. Madness alone is a terrifying theme, but the fear is even greater when it's linked to the idea of some supernatural power that somehow passed through the veils of other worlds into our own. And it is into such a world that my guest for today has now set her own protagonist in a novello that's soon to be published, and that is called Turbine 34. Hello, Catherine Clements, and thank you so much for joining me today on Talking the Gothic. But before we dive into a discussion about your latest book, which I've just mentioned, Turbine 34, and which is part of the Northern Weird Project and will be published by Wild Hunt Books on November the 6th, so that's really soon, I'd like just to tell the listeners a little bit more about you. I actually came to meet you initially through your brilliant historical fiction with your debut, The Crimson Ribbon, and that was followed by The Silvered Heart, and then The Coughing Path, which was quite rightly an Amazon bestseller and was also nominated for the prestigious Historical Writers Association's Gold Crown Award. And I have to say that only the other day I was talking to Kate Griffin, who is actually featured on episode 2 of this podcast. We were on a train together and we were both talking about The Coughing Path and saying how wonderfully written it is and how immersive it is. And I've just got to read it again, actually, because it's been a while. But in addition to those achievements, over the past 10 years, you've worked as a magazine editor, a writing tutor at Sheffield and Manchester universities. You've co-founded an international writing program for historical fiction authors, and you offer expertise as an online teacher and mentor. And in addition to all of this, you've been very busy. In 2018, you were awarded a prestigious Fulbright Scholar Award when you spent a year living and working in New Orleans while researching a novel. Well, I can't wait to see the results of what you come up with after being in New Orleans. But the novella that we're featuring today has been inspired by a setting a little bit nearer to your own home because you live in West Yorkshire in an 18th century cottage on the edge of the moors and with a view that you say might very well be taken straight from the pages of a Bronte novel. So I think with that introduction, I think we just want to get straight into hearing more about this novel, Turbine 34, which I feel sure will have been inspired by the Moors. And my first question is that you begin Turbine 34 with your central character, a young woman, being out on the moors and commenting on the intense heat. And as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, folk horror stories are very often influenced by the weather. So I'd like to ask you about the time in which your story is set and the obvious allusion to drought and global warming, but also about the turbines, which so often are hailed as producing clean energy, but sometimes can cause more harm than good. And I would like to know what your personal view about this is, because I know there is quite a lot of controversy going on at the moment with plans for creating a wind farm on the moors around the area of Haworth.
Yes, thank you for asking me about this, Essie, because this gets right to the heart of the inspiration behind Turbine 34. And I will just explain how this book came about originally, which will help explain my answer to the question. So this novella was commissioned, as you mentioned earlier, as part of the Northern Weird Project, which is a series of 6 pocket-sized novellas, all released throughout 2025 by a small independent publisher based in the north of England called Wild Hunt Books. So Ariel, the editor at Wild Hunt Books, came to me and asked me if I would like to be involved in that project. And the brief was very wide, something set in the north of England and engaging with the north in some way. So when I was trying to think what I might like to write about, I decided to keep that really close to home. And at the time, as you said, I'm very lucky to live in a very beautiful area of West Yorkshire, and I live right on the edge of a big moorland estate called the Walshaw Estate, and many people will know that area as Bronte country. So it's essentially the moors that reach from Haworth over to Hebden Bridge, which is where I live. And as we speak, there are proposals to build England's largest onshore wind farm on that estate, which are essentially blanket peat bogs between Hebden Bridge and Haworth. And those moorlands are not only an SSRI, a site of special scientific interest, but any peat bog is an incredibly valuable habitat. So they store a lot of carbon, they provide crucial habitats for endangered species. They protect local communities from flooding because the peat acts as a kind of sponge. And as anyone who lives around here will know, it's a pretty wet, rainy area. So it acts as a kind of sponge, keeping all of that water up on the moors rather than allowing it to flood down into the rivers and flood the valleys. And of course, the area as well has a very rich cultural and literary heritage. So there's a local campaign in this area against this particular wind farm, not against green energy, but the fact that this is not the right place for this kind of development. And that is my personal view.
Yeah, I
So
absolutely agree. I was walking over those moors earlier this summer and saw all the posters about the wind farm because I hadn't been aware of it before then. And I've looked into it subsequently, and I totally agree with you. This is not the right place at all.
it's not the right
So,
place. And if I'm being very cynical, then it is really the attempt by one greedy landowner, backed by Saudi money, by the way, to
mm,
to devastate a sort of nationally important landscape, which is
yeah.
important for all kinds of reasons, but could have absolutely catastrophic environmental
Yeah, so I
impact.
think if any of our listeners today are interested in this and would like to look up more about it, I don't know if there are any petitions or anybody they can write to. I'm not sure.
Yes, the best
Um,
place to look is if you just Google Stop Calderdale Energy Park
right,
or
okay.
Stop Calderdale Wind Farm. Either one
Yeah,
of those will take you to websites where you can find out all of the
right.
information that's been gathered together.
And actually,
So,
one of what it's not so it's not really so far away from talking about that as to talking about your novella, because your novella is about a turbine, and I think the link there that people will realize, but it's so much more than that. There's a very definite story underlying it, but which we learn about the importance of the moors, and also these peat layers and the peat levels, and how the importance that is to geography and the biology of the soil and to human existence, really. So
exactly,
could
exactly. Yeah,
you, I wonder if, sorry, go on,
sorry,
carry
yes.
on.
You asked me originally about the time that the story is set. So just to clarify, it is set sort of slightly in the future, in the
Mm,
near future. Essentially, the wind farm has been built, and that's where we kind of come into the story.
yes. So would you read maybe the first few pages, because I think that would be great just for setting the tone for everybody, and I just love you to do that because it's a very immersive from the start, and you take us straight in. So maybe if you could read the first few pages.
Of course, I will. So, day one, Easting 398-146, Northing 433-524. Fuck, it's so hot. She wriggles the backpack straps away from the sore patches on her shoulders, shifts its weight hip to hip, sweat pooling in the hollow of her back. Up ahead, the turbine stretches skyward, a skeletal giant, limbs rotating lazily. She should have known the pack was too heavy for this distance, this heat. Should have hitched a ride with one of the estate staff. But she'd wanted to arrive at the site on foot, alone. Approaching by the access track in the climate-controlled bubble of a slick new 4x4 had seemed wrong. She'd wanted to take the old route, the one scored into her bones, imprinted in her blood. She'd wanted to feel the moor-top wind in her hair, to tread familiar paths, feel familiar earth beneath her boots, like a hefted sheep. And she's nothing if not determined. Her father's Yorkshire burr conjures from deep memory. You're bloody minded as a culyow, lass. It's not as if she can get lost here. She recognises the horizon's silhouette, the ridge line of each distant fell, the deep shadowy cut of the valleys, the murmur of traffic from the road over the tops. She'd forgotten, though, how hard going this terrain can be, how easily the tussocked moorgrass turns ankles, how footholds that appear solid are anything but, how the only sure footing is the stepping stone roots of desiccated heather, which should be flowering now, but is mostly parched and stunted, a few lavender blooms struggling from baked peat. She feels the dull stirrings of a migraine behind her right eye. Her meds are stashed at the bottom of the pack. A stupid oversight. There's no way to reach them without excavating carefully organised strata of clean underwear and dried food, petri dishes and field equipment, then repacking it all and hoisting the damn thing back onto her shoulders. She pulls her t-shirt away from her sweat-slicked chest, gropes for the water bottle that's been banging arrhythmically against a loose carabiner on the pack, and takes a long draw. God, that's better. She checks the GPS again. Yes, that's the one. Turbine 34. I'll leave it
Thank
there.
you very much indeed. Thank you. And it really goes on to become the most fascinating, really good folk horror. But the character you begin with is the main character. You don't name her at any point,
Mm.
if I'm correct in thinking that. Um, but this creates a sort of sense of every woman. And it's a story of truths and horrors that could sort of apply to any of us in a way. And was this a deliberate consideration? And would you say that this is a feminist novel?
It's such a great question, that, Essie. And it's not actually something that, in answer to, is it a feminist novel? It's not something that was conscious, but on reflection, yes,
Mm,
I would say it completely is a feminist novel. I she is kind of middle aged, the protagonist. So I was keen to write a middle-aged protagonist, somebody a little bit older than female protagonists that I've written before. In terms of representation, I think, and also just sort of personal experience, I am middle-aged, and I was keen to write somebody sort of in my age bracket. And the choice of not naming her, yes, it was a deliberate choice. Originally, she did have a name, but that name during the writing always felt wrong.
mm,
And I'm sure you will understand, as a writer, sometimes writing is very sort of instinctive and intuitive. And it really was that, like, I just had this name, but it wasn't right. I couldn't find the right name. And then I realized, actually, it sort of feels right to me that she isn't named in
yeah.
the book. And as you say, she is representative of
Mm,
something, which
yes.
I can't say too much more without
No,
spoilers,
no.
but yes, it was definitely a kind of considered decision, and makes it really difficult to talk about her, I have since
No,
discovered.
I think, well, no, I think we can talk about her. I mean, one of the things I'd like to talk about her is the fact that you mention her medication.
Mm.
She's diving down through her bag trying to get it at the bottom. I think this is a great device in any novel, really, but particularly in a Gothic novel or folklore novel, for creating a sense of ambiguity and wondering if she's going to be really reliable as a narrator. Because there are certainly times to come when she starts doubting her own sanity, whether or not she's really seeing things or dreaming them. And of course, this is in all the best traditions of psychological horror, making me think of Nell in Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, with Nell being a vulnerable and damaged individual with things in her past that are affecting her present and perhaps her future. And she goes to Hill House with the hope of finding peace and a place she can belong. So, were you thinking of any characters in that sort of vein when you wrote your central character, or did she simply come to you ready-made? And in a way, I think you probably answered that partly before saying that you know, the she, it felt right. But do you think it's almost like channeling in a way, or were there any other novels in the classic canon that you were thinking of?
I'll be honest, no, um, nothing specific.
Hmm.
So of course I have read, and I watch quite a lot of films in that kind of genre. So of course all of that stuff feeds in. You know, I always think whatever
Yeah,
we take in kind of comes out in our
yeah,
writing. So
yeah.
yes, of course, in that way, there wasn't any one specific character that I was thinking of, but what you did touch on there, particularly when you were talking about Nell, um, was this idea of going to a place, kind of seeking something,
Yes.
seeking a sense of peace or resolution, or a sense of belonging. And that is definitely a very strong thread and a very strong theme in the book. as it seems to be a very strong theme in all of my writing,
Mm,
actually.
mm.
This slight obsession that I clearly have. Um, and again, not really intentional from the beginning, but always seems to come through, and definitely comes through in this piece, I think.
Right, thank you for that. Going back to the location and what she's doing, she's excavating the soil. And this was really unsettling to me because it seemed profoundly dislocating. There's something really dangerous that we're not quite sure what it is going on underneath the surface of this book. And I did feel acres of a book I've mentioned earlier in this podcast, which is Starve Acre. And also The Rats in the Walls, a short story by H.P. Lovecraft that I discussed in another podcast when he starts digging down and down and down through the foundations of a building and down through the soil. But I was also very drawn to the beauty of your writing when you're describing this. You describe the peat crumbling, and I'll quote, between her fingers, dry and dusty as stale breadcrumbs, but she finds the remains of a snail shell, minuscule tendrils of fungi, a clutch of pearlescent slug eggs, glistening like buried treasure, proof of life, reassuring. The breathless beauty of it, the synchronicity, the heart-pounding horror of life's fragility, biology as poetry. And it is very poetical. I do love your writing. And will you tell us? I said earlier she's digging, she's excavating, but why is she doing that? Why is she on the moors? Why is she
Mm.
communing with the natural world in this way? So, what's her job and what's she hoping to find, maybe?
Yeah. So there's kind of, I would say there's two things going on. So ostensibly, she's an environmental scientist, and she is there to investigate the impact of the wind farm's construction. So the impact on the soil, the ecology, the carbon storage capacity, all of those things I was talking about earlier. And she wants to be out on the moors, camped out there on her own to investigate all of those things, to observe the changes in the flora and fauna. And there's quite a lot of talk in there about birds as well, and kind of the
Mm,
birds that are there, present or not present. But there's also a suggestion that she is seeking something more personal. It's a
yeah.
return to a place that she knows, that she's been away from. Um, yeah, I can't say too much more without giving it
No,
away. But
no, that's fine. Um, I will move on because yes, because I know it's terribly difficult, particularly I think with a novella, because in a short story or a novella, every word is important. We have to really belong to that world. With a novel, I think you can sink into it more. You can be more forgiving. You can go rambling off a little bit more, but you not with a short story or a novella. And to say too much would be to give it away. But one thing that's you really, really do immerse us in is the atmosphere of tension in this work, and you're foreshadowing all the time something sinister is coming, particularly at night time. And in
mm,
this story, nighttime is liminal, frightening. There's a time of nightmares, even when the surrounding countryside, it seems to impinge really much more strongly on inner thoughts. And your main character imagines wild creatures with sharp claws or ravenous appetites. She thinks of crows, jackdaws, vampire bats. But also, as the background to this, we've got this swooping, circular sort of humming of the turbines, which is obviously playing on her nerves, would play on anybody's nerves. And when that sound drops, when the wind drops, and it's sort of gone and there's more of a silence. All of the other sounds are more amplified. So it's like an echo chamber, and there's traffic on the roads in the distance sounding like waves crashing on shingle, and shrieks and screams in the darkness that might be wild animals, but which also sound incredibly human to her. And she's really disturbed by this. And there's a mantra she keeps repeating. And this happens more than once in the novella when she keeps saying, I am safe, I am safe, I am safe, which of course makes us think just the opposite. So, first of all, regarding the noises she's hearing and sounds, could you tell us a little bit more about infrasound, which you mention in the story? And it's obviously something to do with these turbines, and you've done some research into this, how sound waves affect mental and physical health, which is a brilliant device in the story. and also very important in respect to what's real and what's not. So could you tell us a bit about
Mm.
that?
Yes, I will. I will just say as well, yes, all of the soundscape of the novel is very much based on my experience, really, of of this locale, and the way that sound carries differently at different times based
Mm.
on the atmospheric conditions. It's something that I notice all the time where I live, how the valleys and hills do act as kind of echo chambers and things like that. So there's an element there that's based just in my own experience. Yes, infrasound. Basically, infrasound is something that I came across when I was doing a bit of reading around and researching around the impact of wind turbines and wind farms when they are located near places where people live. Um, Infrasound is essentially low frequency sound, which we can't hear. It's not audible
Ah,
to
right.
us as humans, but it has an effect on us. It can have an effect on us. Now, the research on this is still pretty patchy, I would say. There are some studies that suggest quite strongly that it can impact our health. And there have been studies and there have been reports of people who live close to big wind farms reporting symptoms like headaches, dizziness, nausea, increased anxiety, a sense of disorientation, and really importantly, even a sense of dread.
Mm.
And that's, anecdotal and needs more research to really explore that. Um, but you can imagine how I sort of read this and thought, okay.
Oh yes. I mean, I think you've utilized it brilliantly. You really have. Other sounds you introduce are those of dogs, and dogs in this story, you have a specific reaction to their existence. So when she's working on the ground at one point, and I did find this very eerie, there are men appear with dogs, and they seem to be hunting grouse. But she also makes a point that that's strange because the bird numbers have dwindled, so it's odd that they're out hunting grouse. And they're also dressed like something out of Downton Abbey. She describes that way. And either they see her there and choose to ignore her, or they simply don't see her at all. But there's also a moment with the dogs when she realized she's heard a dog whistle. And then afterwards she says, well, gosh, to herself, that's strange because human ears can't hear dog whistles, but I heard it really clearly, which is again that infrasound idea. But it's a moment that's very disorientating for your character and for the reader as well. It's a sudden realization that everything here isn't quite what it seems to be. Um, and it's heightened by the fact that, and actually hears sounds which again might be howls of dogs or they could be howls of wolves, and yet wolves haven't existed in England for centuries. And similarly, when she's taking photographs, she sees images from the past that are
Mm.
different to what she knows they would be in the present day. So what's going on with these illusions? Is it to give a heightened sense of paranoia?
Mm. I think what's going on depends on how you interpret it. So, as
Mm.
you said, with the case of the dogs, it could be one thing, it could be another thing. And we've already touched on, how as the reader, we don't know whether she's imagining things, whether she's dreaming, whether how reliable she is as a narrator, if you like, or as a protagonist. But really, what I am fascinated by endlessly, and I think this came out a lot in the Coffin Path, and is definitely threaded through this as well, is the idea that landscape and place holds historical memory
Mm.
and the layers of history that feel so present in certain places. And this landscape, these particular moors, we think of them as this wild, barren, sort of natural landscape, where actually they are the product of many centuries of human intervention. So things like deforestation, farming, drainage, all of these different things over many centuries have created the moors, and particularly around here, big farming communities kind of right up to the moor edge. So it's a very inhabited landscape with lots of small hill farms, and obviously a bit later on in history, the Industrial Revolution, there were lots of mills around here.
Mm.
It really is kind of, you know, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution in the north and the northwest. And so actually, as you move around this landscape now, there's lots and lots of evidence of how humans have impacted and have used this
Yes.
landscape, and it's that layering that I wanted to sort of bring
Yeah.
to the book,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
Another layer you bring in is sort of literary layers. Obviously, we relate to the Moors, particularly in this area around Haworth with the Bronte sisters. And, I wonder what they would think to see a wind
Mm.
farm suddenly blighting such a glorious and iconic landscape. But with regard to Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, I really loved the way, and maybe this is just my own obsession with Wuthering Heights, but you have an isolated house you have bogs erupting and peat preserved bodies, wind being an important feature when it comes to the turbines. So, was this a deliberate thing, or did this just creep in? Because, as you said before, because of other things we've seen and read, that inform writing. Um, you also, they mentioned Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, and they also have a connection, don't they, with the area. So tell us a bit about these references.
Mm. So the protagonist, although she is a biologist, she also loves literature, and she refers to that and talks about that as well. And the other part of the book is, as she's out there on the moors, she is remembering a relationship that she had in her teenage years, which was not a particularly healthy relationship, shall we say.
Mm,
So I wanted to explore the power dynamic of a coercive relationship, really, with this when she was young. And I think those examples of literary relationships that you've touched on there, be they fictional or real,
mm,
yes, I think it was quite intentional that those references were quite relevant. The sort
yes,
of Cathy and Heathcliff thing, the and certainly Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes lived here, just down the road from where I live. So it's a local reference, but it's also a literary reference, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
something that I felt like somebody who was from the area would have those references. You know, they
yes,
would know
definitely.
those references. Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to ask you to reveal what happens in your own story in the conclusion. But to conclude this podcast day, could you tell us what other folklore horrors have influenced your work? I spoke earlier about The Wicker Man in this podcast, but I'm thinking of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson and Midsummer, the film Midsummer. For me, intensely disturbing scenes of ritual sacrifice. And could you suggest any that you yourself might have been inspired by, or if not only for this story, something that you would recommend to our readers to go away
Mm.
and read, as well as reading Turbine 34, of course, in the future?
Yeah. Well, lots and lots of things that I could talk about, but it's funny that you mentioned The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, because I have never read that story and people keep mentioning it to me. So clearly I need to go and
Oh, you
read
do.
it.
You do.
Um, but like you, I am a big fan of Andrew Michael Hurley, and Starvaker is one of my favourite kind of folk horror
Mm.
novels. I've just got his new book, which came out last week as we're talking,
Yes, I'm looking forward
Saltwash.
to reading that. Yes.
Yes, so I will be reading that really soon. And yes, Midsummer I did really enjoy as well. I think things that I've loved that perhaps have influenced the writing of Turbine 34, though, there's a film called Ennis Men, which spelt Enys Men,
Right.
which kind of was a very small film, went very under the radar, but that is has a similar theme of a woman who's isolated and strange things start happening, and she starts kind of seeing things that shouldn't be there, and it's got that same sense of like dislocation. So I did have that kind of in the back of my mind, and I would recommend that. Also, Ben Wheatley's film A Field in England,
Right, I don't
which,
know that one either. So,
okay,
right.
so that is actually about the English Civil War,
Ah,
but
yes.
has a very similar kind of, it's very hallucinogenic, and lots of like strange things start happening literally in a field in England. So there's a lot of stuff to do with land and place, and mysteries about kind of what's really happening and what isn't happening, and that kind of stuff. So those two things kind of came to mind. I think two films. These are all films, actually, aren't they? Two films I would recommend, though, definitely for this time of year. A film called Possum,
Hmm.
which is horrifying, and also The Witch,
Oh,
which
yes, The Witch is brilliant,
which I
isn't it?
loved.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
brilliant. Oh,
Those are
thank you
two
so
of
much.
my
What great,
favourites.
because it's, of course, it's coming out just before Halloween, so
So perfect.
that's a
Yeah.
perfect recommendation. And as I said before, I really do hope so. November 6th is the day when Turbine 34 is coming out,
It's
isn't it?
published. Yes, that's right.
So I really do recommend that. I've now read it twice. I think I found it even more chilling the second time around. And also, I do recommend your previous novels, but this one, for now, for Halloween, is perfect. And thank you so much for being my guest
Well,
for
thank you
this
for having me,
podcast.
Essie.
And it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.
And from myself, my recommendation this month, which has obviously got to be a folklore Gothic novel, is one that's actually not coming out until next year, but the anticipation will be worth it. I've read a proof and I really loved it. It's very special, beautiful writing, very, very profound storytelling. It's called The Hill in the Dark Grove, and it's a debut from Liam Higginson. It's coming out on January the 6th with Macmillan Books. Basically, what it says on the back, and I'll just read this so that you have a quick summary, is it's about Carwyn and Rianne, the last in a long line of sheep farmers, and they're living out a brutal year in their hillside farm deep in the mountains of North Wales. And it's a very bitter cold winter during which Carwyn stumbles on a stone circle in a field on their land. And when he finds this and starts pulling away the vegetation, and basically it's another excavation novel, his curiosity descends into an obsession. And meanwhile, his wife is confronted with the growing realization that there's something very wrong with the man with whom she has shared her whole life and loved intensely. He's becoming more like a stranger. As the winter closes in, she finds herself alone with her increasingly strange husband, with the mountains and the looming megalithic stones becoming yet more menacing. It's chilling, it's atmospheric, and it's beautifully written. So next January, that's my recommendation for now, but you can actually pre-order it now. The Hill in the Dark Grove by Liam Higginson. And with that, I will say goodbye and I will think about the subject of the next Talking the Gothic podcast. Thank you for listening today. Bye bye.